Hi everyone, hope everyone's having a great week so far. This week we're going to be talking about climate change education and schooling, so looking into climate education as a whole, looking into the ways it is a part of schooling, the ways it is not, recommendations, practices such as those. We are both really passionate about this project. I know we're both very excited to be guiding you through all of these learnings this week, so I hope you all enjoy our presentation. I will be starting us off and I'll talk about the first few readings assigned to us by Dr. Fields, and then there'll be a secondary video later in the presentation to do the rest of the readings there. The first part that I want to talk about is the Acting for Change report. This was a report that basically wished to prove that education is a vital part of climate change. This was a report done with the help of 8 Southern Ontario teachers who took part in these climate change meetings, who then gave responses. Because we all know that education is a vital part of the conversation here. If we are ill-informed, our students are ill-informed, the change cannot happen. It's point blank that. So essentially we're really proving that education is the first step. Schooling is the first step. If we are unable to have climate change be a part of the conversations that occur in schools, nothing's gonna change. The climate change situation will just continue to get worse and worse and worse. And so we need to recognize that education is a necessary and very crucial and very important step, a step that needs to be prioritized and to be put at the forefront of this conversation. So it was a really great report because it just proves how much education is needed within climate change. We need to ensure that that is a part of the conversation of climate change as a whole. The teachers then also gave innovative but practical ways schools can approach climate change. So there are 8 great examples in there about ways in which we can incorporate climate change into our classrooms. Climate change isn't necessarily shown in the curriculum to the degree that it should be. It's not as reflected as it should be, and so a lot of the times teachers need to kind of make up their own thing. I know I've been there, I'm sure a lot of you have too, where you have an idea and you try to make it work because you're just trying to give a message to your students, and so that was really important as well. And then there's also recommendations for future schooling. So one recommendation that really stuck with me, I don't want to summarize everything, but one that I think is really important is we need to make it fun. So this article is a really great resource for educators to see what climate change should be and how we can help each other, how we can help fellow educators get there. We need to make space for education. When we're talking about climate change, we need to make space for schools and for students and for the future who are going to be the ones leading this charge eventually. And so we would be doing them a disservice if we did not involve them in that conversation as soon as possible. I also want to touch base on the Green Learning Agenda. This is essentially looking at the ways in which our curriculum can be more green, can involve climate change in a better way, in a more efficient way. Basically, this looks into COVID-19 and the way it disrupted the school system, and we need to take that opportunity of disruption to build differently, to build more efficiently. It really looks at the underlying causes of non-quality education and the reason why we do not have climate change education in our current curriculum. We can look at then the underlying causes, such as the underlying economic issues, the inequality issues that exist, the social issues that exist in our current system, and break them down, find the root problem, and then build back up. And this would include quality education for climate change, which is something that is needed, something that is very desired at this point. I really love that we're able to look at these issues and see a reason to build up differently. With the new approaches suggested by the Green Learning Agenda, we want to then very much put a focus point on those who are most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. We saw this in previous weeks, but we see that those who are most vulnerable to climate change are unfortunately not at the forefront of most conversations. It's really they're vulnerable to climate change, the impacts of climate change, and they're the ones being affected the most by the climate change, but they're not being protected in the way that they need to protect. So the framework of this agenda really wants to ensure that the needs of those vulnerable peoples are at the forefront of the conversation. We want to make sure that everyone is included. Next, we're going to talk about climate change action for youth study, which basically we're looking at what influences young people's decisions to take climate change action. We look at the cognitive factors and the psychosocial factors in this study. I think it's really important to note that the social factors, so the social norms of those people around them in particular, was the main reason why or why not students were engaging in pro-environmental behavior. So if a student was not surrounded by adults who cared about climate change action, then they did not care about climate change action. If I, as a teacher, do not prioritize climate change action, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen for those students because they're not going to understand it. We also can see that when they have prior knowledge, and I will point out that not a lot of the students here did have prior knowledge, which is an issue on its own, but those students who did have prior knowledge on climate change, it didn't really impact the amount of behaviors they engaged in simply because it was not enough to motivate them to make change. So we need to make sure that in climate education and climate schooling, we are not only informing students about climate change, but we're also giving them motivators. We're giving them the understanding that they can make a change, and we want to give them real life solutions they can have in order to make that change. So the study was very, very, very interesting because it shows the way students and young people are thinking, and therefore allows for us to see how we can build on those and those influences and see what impacts them and build it in a baseline way so we can ensure that as many students as possible are engaged in the conversation, are feeling good about the conversation, and are making pro-environmental behavior changes in their life. Climate change education in schooling is an incredibly important thing. It's frustrating at times when it's not made the priority it needs to be made, but we as educators don't need to specifically not do it because it's not in something like a curriculum or because we do not have the approaches we need or we're not given the training we need. We can still ensure that we are doing that for our students and informing them on climate change as a whole and in schooling. We can incorporate it regardless because this is part of the way students will become informed citizens in this day and age. Climate change is such a massive global, societal, economic, etc. issue that it needs to be talked about in the classroom in order for students to be prepared for the outside world when they leave our classroom. We want to ensure that they understand the urgency, to have that sense of urgency about the situation, but we also want to make sure we're not giving them that overwhelming sense of doom as well. So it's a very delicate and precise role that we as educators play, but it's one I feel quite honored to play. And I hope that the importance of climate change education only continues to grow and that the awareness for these issues only is something that gets bigger and bigger and bigger.